Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. Today I spoke with Kathi, who has written some children's books, and they're books from everything from adoption to addiction. And it's important because we often talk about how children don't always understand or grasp what problems adults are going through. And that's what Kathi tackled in her books. And we had a fantastic conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Hello again. How are you doing? Are you well?
I am very well. How are you?
I'm good. And welcome to the David Watson podcast. It's very good of you to come on. And I just realised I literally have done the shortest hello, how are you before we started recording that I've probably ever done on a podcast. I've just literally jumped straight into it. And so, yeah, I'm trusting that everything in Pennsylvania with you and yourself and is all good and everything's okay.
All is well. I have a motto, all is well in Lockwood land.
I like it. And where did you say you were in Pennsylvania?
I'm in the Pocono Mountains, so I'm about an hour and a half west of Manhattan, actually.
Okay.
Not like Stonehenge, but it's, a city.
What I'm trying to do is I think I should put a map of America, but it'd be too detailed. I always like to try and figure out sort of where people are in their location, because everyone sort of knows America until you ask them to point to somewhere on a map. And if it's not sort of Texas, Miami, California or New York, they'll be like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And people kind of, so you're left of New York. Is that right?
Right. Exactly. Very, right across, there's a river, and across the river,
Okay.
I live on the other side of the river,
I
in the
see.
mountains, in the country.
I bet that's beautiful there at the moment.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I
Um,
want to thank you for having me on today.
you're very welcome.
Really pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. And we're going to talk about your books, aren't we? And
Mhm.
spiritual growth, inspiring hope. But before we started that, there was something that was sent to me in the sort of the prep that they send me about the books and stuff. And
Uh-huh.
one of the things that was mentioned is the stories from the books originated from like long drives with the children in the back of the car,
Yes,
and you used
that's
to
how I
tell
started
stories.
telling.
Yeah, but did you ever experience the same long drives when you were a kid?
Yes, but I didn't get stories. I had long drives. I had four sisters, and we would periodically get in the car to visit my grandparents, which from Boston to Philadelphia was like a very long drive at the time. But my mother did not tell us stories. She did not entertain us at all.
So how would you the
We
four?
entertained each other.
Yeah. So what would that be like? Four sisters.
Well, while we were driving, I remember this is an odd story, but I remember making up a game because somebody got the hiccups. And we had four little kids sitting in the back seat, no car seats, no seat belts.
It was a
Someone got
wonderful
the
time.
hiccups, and I said, "Well, let's play a game and guess how many seconds it's going to be between hiccups." So we entertained ourselves by guessing how many seconds and see who would win. Was it like 12 seconds or
Yeah.
15 or one between hiccups? So we entertained ourselves with that. I remember doing that.
But
Um,
that's. I mean, that you were saying about being. What was the? Do you remember the vehicle that you'd be in most likely?
yes, I do. My father was a carpet salesman. So he had like a big station wagon, and sometimes we would be in that, but other times we had an old black Plymouth, like from the
Mm-hmm.
49, 50 Plymouth. It was just a big old black car. And when I guess we drove in both of them because when we went to Florida, we would have my father's company car
Yeah.
because he would take all the carpet samples out and put like a mattress in and we'd lay in the back. It was, 3 days in the car to get to 3 or 4 days to get to Florida. But just the 1 day trip, we were in a regular black Plymouth, just one of those
I
big
like that. I
hump.
like that because it reminds me of when you initially said about being in the back with no seatbelts. I remember there was a period of time my dad he had this old van that he used to drive around, and sort of only had one seat in the front. Well, the driver's seat and the passenger seat. So the kids were always in the back, and you spend most of your time arguing over who was going to get to sit on the spare wheel, because otherwise you're just sitting on the bed of the back of the van. And of course, no seatbelt. So whenever he had to brake suddenly or went over a bump or something, you just went
But it was
yeah, you just went wherever you got thrown about, and that was you were I think there would be some blankets or something in the back that you could like sit on to make a cushion. But yeah, it would be the same sort of. And of course, like that, if the journey was a bit long, you'd just be lying down in the back.
yeah,
You know.
take a nap.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you couldn't imagine explaining that to kids today. Tablets, iPhones, whatever, seat belts, airbags, and all that.
Yeah, just all of us scrunched in together
Yeah,
for hours and
yeah, it's crazy.
baby sitting up in the front seat with my mom.
So we fast forward to you and your children, and you
Yes.
started telling these stories to them.
Yeah. Right. And they I guess they were used to entertainment,
Hmm.
Sesame Street and everything. And so I would usually be the driver also because I considered myself a better driver than my late husband. And they'd say, "Tell us a story." So I would just make up stories, and I would just make them up, and and I make them up for the three of them. I have three children, so I called the kids in my stories Cammy and Sammy and Little Lammy. So that's Trieste, Dominic, and Amelia. So they knew who they were in the story, and the three of them would go on adventures in my storytelling. And I guess we were visiting my parents over Christmas, and I started telling the Christmas story, and I really liked it. And so
Hmm.
it was probably a decade or two later that I actually um, put it into a book because I had it written down uh, as a animation film, but that never happened.
Yeah.
And I changed it again, and I eventually just made it into this children's picture book. And I had already my first book. I I guess I was telling stories way back, and my first book was on adoption because my son was adopted, and he came home from school crying one day because someone told him I wasn't his real mommy, and just to explain my family, I gave birth to my oldest daughter. I had a miscarriage before her. I had a miscarriage after her. My son, my husband called me up one day and said, "This woman just walked into my office." He was a lawyer. "This woman just walked into my office and said she's pregnant and she wants me to find a home for her child, a loving home for her child." She said, "I know you, Mr. Lockwood. I know you're really kind and a good man and you have a good reputation. I'm trusting you to find a loving home for my family, for my child." And so she just walked in and said that to him. And then he called me and he said, "Kathi, do you want this baby? I think it's going to be a boy." And I said, "Sure." Um, Actually, last summer my son was home and I pointed out the very phone I picked up back then and said, "This is where your father told me that you were going to be born and you were going to be my son." This
Did
is where I was
did you
standing that moment.
did you hesitate at all, or just no? I'll do this.
No, I had no hesitations. We did, um, yeah, we knew that she was a very distressed
Yeah,
person and living in a distressed environment, and that there had been some kind of drug use in the past. But so we were concerned about his healthy well-being. Would he be, but she actively really tried to be very good with herself and not do drugs while she was pregnant. And then she was taking her vitamins and seeing the doctor. So when he was born, he had a great APGAR score, which is, how how healthy the baby could be. I guess that's
Yeah.
what you would call it. And so we're like, okay, we are happy to have him. But there was that concern, but there's, your heart is your heart,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
Yeah.
your love is your love. And whether someone is, your own child could be born with, with a problem. So
I
you
think
never,
where my curiosity is that the reason your husband rang you, in my head, the reason is because he knew that you'd have the baby, which would tell
yeah.
me that he wanted it as well. Because
Oh, yeah.
it's an easy phone call not to make and never discuss it.
Oh,
So
he wanted 10 children.
yeah. So it's just, I can just, and it's,
And the thing is, the miscarriages, the baby that was miscarried would have been born that September, and that call came into me in November. So I'm still grieving the loss of not having that 2-month-old baby in my heart,
yeah.
because I lost that baby. And then here he is, like, here's one, here's a baby.
And I'm going to
And
apologize for my
and I just felt
curiosity.
it was
I'm going to apologize for my curiosity. And
okay. What?
the reason for that is because I'm kind of putting two and two together and coming up with this. It's like, because you'd already mentioned that you had a miscarriage, your oldest daughter was born, then you had a miscarriage, and then your husband phoned you and said, "Hey, I've got a kid. Do you want it?" And it's kind of, I think where I'm feeling that there's kind of like this is quite miraculous is for two people to be that close. As, because I know he's your husband and wife, but he's that close, and he must have understood your grieving, and he must have been grieving himself. But for both of you to see it as an opportunity to have the child, and to be able to have that conversation with each other.
And we it just wasn't even a conversation. It was just understood. Of course, we would want that
Yeah.
child. It was just, well, of course.
I just think it's beautiful. I just think it's that two people know each other that well, that your husband knew to just would I know you'll want to do this sort of thing, so I'll make the phone call.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
And then I just felt it was like divine
Yeah,
intervention. And another thing about his birth, which did not happen with my daughters, but about 2 weeks before he was born, I had a dream where I was holding. Now, my late husband was Italian, so our children are a little darker skinned with black hair. And so I had a dream that I'm holding this big, chunky, blonde boy. And that was just not what my daughter was. She was skinny and she was dark hair and darker olivey skin. And I'm like, in my dream, I'm holding
yeah,
this baby. Oh, look, here's my baby. And then 2 weeks later, he was born, and he was a big, blonde, chunky little boy. And so I just felt that this child was destined to be my child, the
yeah,
same as the child born to me. This child is my child. Um, from a spiritual point of view, I mean, we're all souls. I think we're souls before we're born, and we continue to be souls after we leave the body. But, there's like this
yeah.
transition of the soul into and out of bodies, which is pretty popular opinion in many religions. And
I wrote a book on the
and
very
so,
principle of reincarnation.
pardon me?
I wrote a book on reincarnation many years ago.
Okay, well, I figured this boy was coming to us for a particular reason. And the same as, why this child was born and this child wasn't born. And so that's basically the theme of my book for children, because I wanted him to understand that he was equally my child,
Yeah.
whether he was born to me or not born to me. The divine organization was getting him to me one way or the other. And later on, he said to me, "Well, why was I adopted?" I said, "Well, maybe my body can't carry boys." I
Yeah.
said, "Maybe my body can't carry boys, and you wanted to be a boy, so you had to come this way." I said, "Would you rather be a girl?" And he says, "No, I'm okay. I want to
Yeah.
be a boy." He was about 5 or 6 at the time, but he wanted to be a boy. So he and then eventually I had another daughter after that. But that was the premise of my book, that these are the
Yeah.
parents that God wants you to have, however you get there. In my book, Charlie, who is born to his family, goes on a train, and Amy gets to her family by boat. So
Yeah.
she just takes a different passage. A big key part. Now, I've done trauma. There's a lot of trauma with children who've been adopted,
Yeah.
because they feel this, I've been abandoned, I've been given away. And the purpose of my book is to shift that paradigm from, you know, being given away to someone, but being delivered to the place where you belong. It's a different concept. And it helps lessen whatever the trauma is of some children who have, you know, serious problems with that sense of abandonment.
I knew this girl once. I still sort of know her vaguely, and she found out when she was 14 that her dad wasn't her real dad. And I always remember I was struck because she was telling me the story in her 30s. When she found out, like, she said she was 14 or 15. She come home. It was her real mum, but it wasn't her real dad. And I was just like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't really know what to say. And she was just like, she said she felt like the luckiest girl in the world because her dad chose her. He didn't have to have her.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just blown away by the way that her mind worked, because she was so close to him as well, and adored him, because she wasn't like, it's not fair. She was, wow, this man chose me and wanted me as his daughter when he didn't have to have me.
That's a great,
Yeah, it
great
blew me
way to
away.
be.
It just took me, like,
And and I think I read some books about people and with a spiritual journey between lives,
mm,
and people are born um, into adopted families for different reasons. And
yeah,
one of them is maybe because there is a karmic thing of abandonment, that maybe they abandoned someone. So then they go into an adopted home and feel that abandonment. I don't know. But there's all kinds of
well, it's difficult, isn't
depth
it? Because
in our mind.
it is incredibly difficult, because on one hand, if you think about, and I don't wish to personalize it towards your son, but his biological mother wasn't in a position to raise a child, but
Right.
had enough awareness that she was honest about that. And
Hmm.
and this in some cases is the same for all children that are adopted. There are circumstances that mean that the person giving birth to you, your biological parent, cannot look after you for whatever that reason may be. And you're about
Hmm.
to meet people who are choosing you, who are just like, look, for whatever reason, we want a child, and we want that child to be you.
Yeah.
And I think, but it's like you say, from a children's perspective, it can be, why wasn't I wanted? And it's just like, no, we really wanted you. We
Yeah.
actually desperately wanted you.
It's a paradigm
Mm,
shift. It's a paradigm shift from abandonment to a desire to have a baby. So um, I don't. The different children respond differently
yeah,
to it. So my book is just, these are the parents that God wants you to have, because I think of God as like this divine, intelligent energy force of energy. So there's lots of different definitions of God. I use the word God in my book because it's,
It's one we
commonly
understand.
understood.
Yeah.
Something
Where
something that has a will that sometimes affects our lives, many times affects our lives.
where did your faith begin?
I was born Catholic, so I I have another story about my very first, I called it my minor miracle, because I was in sixth grade, so I would have been around, what, 10. And I was going to a Catholic school, and I found this little sheet of paper on the pew, and when I went into mass, and it was like a little novena, and it said, say this for like 9 days in a row and you'll get whatever you want. I'm like, cool, I want a puppy. I want a dog. And my parents would not let me have one. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to get a dog. And so I said this prayer, and I just said it over and over again all day. I said it on the bus. I said it in the classroom when I was bored. I said it at night. And I just said it, I don't know, multiple times a day. And and then one day I was standing in my front yard, and my sisters were there, and they were jumping rope, and the boys across the street were playing basketball. We were all outside. And I looked down, and there was a dog sitting at my feet. I never saw him approach. I don't know why he came to me instead of other people, but just like that, there was a dog sitting at my feet. And I just that started my journey of like, what's going on here? How did that happen? And and so that's the beginning of my spiritual quest on trying to understand the nature of reality and the nature of, who we are as souls and spirits, as consciousness, as energy. And I guess that was a gift from some place that my higher self, my angels maybe. Oh, look, Kathi, here's a puppy. Now you figure it out.
Yeah, it's probably been for as long as I can remember, because I'm the same as you. I was born a Catholic, and for as long as I can remember, I have obsessed about it. I have obsessive about what does it all mean, what's the purpose, and where are we from. And
Hmm.
I've tried to answer it in the book, and I think I'm trying to remember how I said something along the lines of you effectively have three options. You can just not believe in anything, in which case don't bother reading the book, it's going to do you no good. The second one is you can believe in a religion if you want to,
Hmm.
but that's determined by where you're born, because there's something like 3,000 known religions, you know.
Hmm.
So, but if you believe in some sort of religion or there's something, the question isn't what is the purpose. Like, I'm trying. How did I word this? It's we're often like we have this idea that the body is a vessel, and
Hmm.
I turned and said something along the lines of the question isn't what is our purpose. The question should be we obviously come from somewhere. So the question should be why would we do this?
Hmm.
And that's the question that I always try and ask is if we come from somewhere else, we're a soul, we're an energy, we're part of this
Yes.
greater force where we know everything and we're combined, however people want to determine that. Why would you forget everything to come here and do this? It's
Do you want
painful.
me to tell you what I think about
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah. I'd love to.
Um, well, I believe in a deep meditation one time I asked that same question. I felt this, oneness of the universe, and I felt one with it. And then I asked, like, when we're all one, why did we come to this world
Mm.
to do this separate thing that we feel like someone is separate from us? Because I was in the moment of feeling oneness with everyone and everything. It was a very beautiful time, space. And the answer was, we want to be able to love another person. So if we continue in our spiritualness, where we're all part of the one, unified field, if you
Mm.
want to talk about quantum physics, we're all part of this one, divine intelligent force. We separate ourselves to give ourselves a body so that I am separate from you, so therefore I can love someone else. We wanted to be able to love another person.
Mm.
And if when we're part of the oneness, there is no other.
Yeah, that makes. I do kind of.
That's my answer.
Look, I if I knew the answers, I'd bottle it up, and you'd all be buying it. And
I'm sure there's many more answers, but
I
we're
had.
all individual.
I remember having an experience during a meditation probably 20 years ago, and the only way I can describe it, and I always try to explain to people that the biggest problem trying to explain something is words are incredibly limiting,
Mm-hmm.
and just cannot
Mm-hmm.
just. But I was effectively this meditation, and I don't know if what happened was for a split second, because it felt like an eternity in so many ways. But I was effectively on a mountain. And when I say I was looking out across the earth, but I could see the entire universe. I could see everything.
Mm.
But I was aware of everything that had ever existed and everything that will exist. There was nothing I was not conscious about. And I cannot, I've no idea how long I was actually there in what we would describe as physical time. I can only tell you that while I was there, I understood everything. But
You were connect. You were
yeah,
connected.
I have never felt so lonely ever since I left it. And it has
Mm.
always left a hole in me.
That's interesting because when I was in that state of consciousness,
When I was in that
I,
state, like I cannot words cannot explain how everything was just and these it's everything was as it should be.
yeah,
But when I came back to this physical state, there's a part of me that cannot wait to return. And
yeah.
I don't mean this.
Home. Did it feel like home?
It's
Would you say it was like
it just felt
home
like
and
it
it's
should
like
be.
faded
But
away?
and I don't mean this to be taken the wrong way, but there's a part of me that can't die quickly enough. But
That
I'm
can't what?
die quickly enough. But I don't mean that to be misunderstood. It's just like there's a part of me. It's just like, look, I know I'm supposed to be doing something, but so can we crank that clock on, crank that clock up, and let's get on with this? Because I know, but I'm also aware that in its own way, I get to do this and have its experiences that promote that and talk about that. So I do have a gratitude for it, but there's a part of me that's chased that ever since. I just want to go back there and
Right.
sit in it.
And I guess just the very fact that it happened to you is very significant
Yeah,
in who you are today.
yeah. I'd never thought about it like that.
It's part of your. I look back and say, well, why did I have this experience, and why did I have that experience, and why did this happen? And I think it's just my soul's direction to my personality self. Kathi Lockwood, da 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 da, mother of three, blah blah blah. And then there's the soul,
Yeah.
right?
The
The
the reason
soul
I've started
is
laughing is because there was a
sort
part of
of
me
like
when you were saying
guiding.
this, like, why have I? Sorry, and I didn't. My apologies for cutting you off, but I was starting to laugh because I heard this little voice inside my head when you said, like, why am I doing this and stuff like that. And this little voice in my head was just like, David, stop being so impatient. You don't have to know everything.
There you are. There's your answer, right inside your own head.
Yeah. And that pretty much does sum me up. I want to know everything, and I want to know it now. Yeah.
And you're working on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look what you're doing. You're doing a wonderful, wonderful service to humanity.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, you just I cut you off. You were just talking about that connection, that oneness.
Yeah, and I wanted to say that when I was in that space, one of the things I thought was how can anyone ever be lonely when we're all one?
Yeah.
And so when you said you are out that now that you're not experiencing that same consciousness level of whatever, and being lonely, just remember it. Just remember it. You can't be lonely if you remember that you're part of everything
Yeah.
and everyone.
Yeah. No, it's
I
absolutely
mean,
true. It's absolutely true. It's, I think you just made me think of something then. I kind of remember it and view it as I'm now separated from it instead of remembering
mhm.
the experience as being part of it.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to, but the beauty of having had it is you have the memory of it.
Mm.
And when you focus, you can bring yourself back sort of to that
Yeah.
space. It as a practice, I do that actually. I try in my meditation to, remember this is how this is that moment, who I am, and remember who I was in that moment. That's part of my meditation practice,
That's a good one.
is to just remember that. And I feel very blessed and very lucky that I had that experience. And there's a reason why I had it, and I'd like to keep it alive in my daily life, even though it is, I'm not there. I'm still, here,
Mm.
but I know that that happened. Like, that that happened. You had that experience, and that experience was very real,
Yeah.
and an experience of a love of a different, um what would you call it? A different level of consciousness, a different part of your soul, maybe. Your soul,
It's
my soul. Your
yeah.
soul.
It's the strangest experience in a sense because as I remember it, I'm literally sitting there like I am today, like I am now, and I'm sitting on top of a mountain. But I'm also aware that on sitting on top of the mountain, there's a part of me that's sitting on top of myself. There is nothing that I am not connected to, and
Mm-hmm.
I
Right.
always remember how there's this vivid memory of I'm aware of everything that has ever been and everything that will ever be. And there is nothing that will ever exist or has ever existed that I'm not aware of. And in that moment, that, like I said, it's just like I I am everything and I'm aware of everything.
And now from that space, you're doing what you're doing. So
Yeah,
you're practicing your oneness.
yeah, yeah, yeah. When you look when you talk to me about it like that, it's just like I said, I'm aware that I've completely separated myself from it. And I look at it as if I'm separate instead of actually no, you were part. The memory you have of that is being part of everything, so you still are. But
Yeah.
I've
Part
chose,
of everything you do.
sort of similarly to kind of bringing it back to where we were with the adoption. You can choose the I've been chosen or why wasn't I wanted, and I've
Mm-hmm.
chosen to remember it as I'm now separated from it. Instead of like, even
Yes.
though I'm talking to you about how I was aware that I am part of everything and everything is a part of me, I'm talking to you like I'm not in it anymore.
But you still are.
Yeah,
You're just,
yeah.
it's just the
Well,
illusion that you're not.
I've actually forgotten what
You,
the meaning of the experience is.
the meaning of the experience?
Yeah, because the meaning of the experience when I was up there, as I explained it to you, I was aware of how everything is part of everything. It's all combined. There is no separateness. There is no separation. But I've always, until I was talking to you now and had the new realization, ever since I've left it, I've looked at it like I am separated from it instead of
But you're not.
no, exactly. Yeah, you know. So yeah, thank you for that because it's been about 20 years waiting for someone to point out that obvious flaw in the way I was looking at
Well,
it.
it isn't, it's not a common thing. Actually, it is a common thing. Not, I mean, it's not common, but at least 50% of the population has some kind of a magical moment like that.
Yeah,
And Edgar, what was his name?
Edgar Casey, is
The
it?
astronaut, not
No.
Edgar Casey, the astronaut who had like this wonderful experience on the way back from the moon. He was like
Oh,
one
right.
of the first people up on the moon. And he said, I saw him speak one time. He said, I was the engineer. So on the way back, I didn't have a lot to do. So he was sitting there staring out the window and saw the Earth in the distance. And he had this amazing experience back in the 70s. And he started this organization called Institute, no, what is it? IONS, INONS. And it is a study of paranormal, scientific study of paranormal processes. And he started this back in 1970. And one of the first things he did was, who else gets these experiences? I had this mystical experience just pop into my head. Who else does it? And the studies that they did found out at least 50% of people
Oh, wow.
have those experiences. And then they say, oh, well, that couldn't have really happened, and ignore it and just walk
Yeah.
away without, so it is more common than we think. We just ignore it because we can't explain it. So we just ignore it,
It is.
I
And
think.
no, I agree. I agree. Like I said, I don't really have I've, for a long time not had the opportunity to speak about it. And while speaking to you, as I realised how I was looking at it completely wrong. Because I've even referred to the fact that I've chased it, like it was, interestingly the same as you write about addiction. I for a long time I think I chased it as an addiction. Like, I need to go back. I need to go back. I need that hit. I need to know what. But purely because I was treating it like a sense of loss, like I'd lost something, instead of remembering that I'm connected to it.
Yeah.
It'll be
Yeah.
interesting
Then
to
there's
see how meditations follow now.
Pardon me?
It'll be interesting to see how my meditations follow.
Well, it will be. Maybe you ought to let me know when
I will, yeah.
when
Yeah, we'll keep in touch.
that happens. Just let me know
Yeah, I will.
because I do it.
Yeah.
It's,
So you also wrote the the three books are, is it An Adoption Made in Heaven,
mhm.
The King and the Monster,
Yes,
A Christmas Eve Adventure, Finding the Light of the World.
right. Now that one is basically the story that you just told me about you.
Okay.
And, when you were there, you were aware that you were part of the light of the world, right? You had that experience. You know that you were one with all of it. And there is this energy of light that we use as it's in all the world, many, many, many world religions. You can find it in Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam and Christianity. There's always this reference to, humans having the light or being the light. And so you experienced that in your point. And so it is something that is experienced. So in my Christmas book, I wrote, I took this adventure, and this is the story I told in the car, I guess 30 years ago. And the children were two children, and the little boy was a little frightened little boy, and the little girl was a little, I'd like to use the word like a little snotty little girl. She was just not really nice.
Yeah.
And the two of them were at a pageant and a Christmas pageant, and she was really mean to the person who got to be Mary, and because she didn't get to be Mary, and the little boy had something to say, and when he looked at the audience, he just saw a bunch of monsters, and he was frightened, and he ran off the stage without saying what he was supposed to say, his one line. But that night, an angel comes and pulls them out the window, and they land in the field with and they're soon met by the shepherds, and then the angel appears and says, Jesus is, the Christ child is born, and you have to go to Bethlehem. So I tell that whole story, and so they help the shepherds find Jesus, and and they have their own little adventures. There's a talking bird,
Yeah.
and they find out they can't tell them we know everything about Jesus because if they try to say anything about the future, they sound like a bird.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
they can't tell themselves, but they're like, we know. So at the end of this long and hard day, the shepherds are like so tired and they're like, we're just gonna leave. That whole thing was a dream. There is no baby. And of course the two little children know that there really is Jesus born somewhere. And so this talking bird, they asked the bird to help them find it, Jesus, and the bird says, sure, you just had to ask. Of course, the symbolism of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
So then they finally get the shepherds to follow them and they find Jesus sound asleep in a manger. And Mary and Joseph are in the back and they see this glow of light. And they say, whoa, Jesus really is the light of the world because his heart is glowing. And then they notice that the baby is unwrapped his blankets and he's cold. And should they approach? That's the big question. Should they approach God? Because that's God,
Yeah.
and God is out there and dare we approach God? So it's this existential question. And they realize that Jesus was born because he wants humans to be closer to God. So they go and wrap him up. And after they wrap him up, he smiles and touches them, and lights flash all over the place. And then they look and they see that glow within themselves and everyone else, all the shepherds and everybody has that glow. Then the angel reappears and says, well, now you know what you came here for. You can go home. And the little girl says, does everybody have this light in them? What about mean people? And the angel responds that yes, mean people, even the mean people, have that glow, that have that light in them, that life in them. But God is still there, or they may forget it, they may ignore it, but it's still there. So the beauty of that is that we all have this idea that there are mean people out there, people that we don't agree with on multiple levels, maybe political, religious, or whatever, and maybe they're doing things we don't approve of. But it's really important. Part of this story is that everyone has that same life inside of them. They just maybe ignore it. So then and they come back and the story starts all over again, only everything in the story they have changed. And now the girl is really nice to the person who
Yeah.
became Mary. And the little boy, they're up on the stage and the little boy's one line is there's a little plastic baby doll and somebody flips a switch and the baby doll lights up and the little boy says, behold the light of the world. And when he says that, the two of them look at each other and the angels and the shepherds and everything comes back. And then they look out at the audience and there in the audience, everyone of all religions and all races has that light in them.
Yeah.
So it's basically, I call it it's a Christmas book, but I'm an interfaith minister, so I call it an interfaith Christmas book. A lot of people don't get the big idea, but
Yeah.
every religion does talk about light,
Yeah.
in humans.
So
So that's my
what
story.
is an interfaith minister? Explain, because
Well, I went to a seminary in Manhattan, and it's a 2-year program, but it's basically we studied the world religions and major world religions and took a month to get an understanding of it and practice one of the practices or two of the practices of that religion. And then so we get it, if you think about it, when you think about the more mystical aspects of any of the world religions. You could have either Meister Eckhart, a Christian mystic, or Rumi, or a yogi, and they all basically say the same thing. You can't really tell what religion they
yeah.
are because they're just talking about, like not the dogma of the religion, but the higher beliefs of the religion. So we practice, we, my feeling is, um, if every religion believes it, that's probably true.
Yeah,
You know, every religion believes that there's like some kind of life after death. I mean, Buddha doesn't really talk about it a lot, but he implies. Um, but there's uh, just a higher understanding, more mystical understanding of each of the world religions because they're all pretty much the same. And so then, like if a Christian wants to marry a Jew, I understand, what their practice is and what their practice is, and I can marry people of mixed religions and I understand how to honor the
yeah.
practice of each ceremony. So that
Because yeah, I don't think many people realize that if you can pick any religion from around the world, and if you break it down to its basic principles, it's identical to every other religion around the world. You know,
yeah,
we literally just change the names of the deities, the angels, the disciples, the saints. Well, whatever. It's just they all kind of tell the same parables, the same. It is. It's almost like there was one story at the very beginning, and it kind of, when there's like big family reunions and something happens, and everybody's got a memory of it, but when they all go
hmm
back to wherever they're from, they all tell the story slightly different because they're telling it from their own perspective. That
yes.
that's like religion.
Yes, and that's a really good analogy. It is like a religion because people all through all time, I believe, have been having experiences like the one that you had and the one
Yeah,
that I had, and then we come out and we try to explain it in our own way. But it's just that one unified force that we're all trying to explain through our own language and through our own perspective in our culture. I did a lot of studies. I studied, I was very close to my master's in theology at Moravian Seminary in Bethlehem. And I spent a lot of time studying the Hebrew Bible there. And it just it was very revealing about the source of where a lot of our beliefs come from.
how so?
Yeah. Um, it's El Shaddai, for instance, just curiously, El Shaddai was a term used that they would honor God, El Shaddai, but Shaddai is referring to breasts, to
Okay,
mountains, breasts, to breasts. So El Shaddai really is a female god,
yeah.
but that is part of the ancient Hebrew tradition. But most people don't know that today, that there were male and female gods represented in the Hebrew religions
I
way
do.
back in the.
Yeah, it always fascinates me because as much as we know our history, we don't know it, and people don't understand the evolution of Christianity. That they will talk about, that they know it, and it's just like no. It's I think it was Venus became the Virgin Mary. The god Nike was Jesus. Do you know what I mean? And it's evolution. It's effectively modernizing traditional stories with the times. So they just moved with the times,
Mhm.
but we're still telling the same story.
And when you're reading the Hebrew Bible, there's like it's written over like 16, 1800 years at least. And there's written by, I think they have like five different categories or timelines in which it's written. So you have two Noah stories. You
Okay.
have the Noah story that has two animals, and then immediately after that, or before that, I forget, but immediately there, adjacent is the Noah story where there are seven animals. And so you wonder why are there two Noah stories? And there are two Noah stories because the original ones were written by maybe the Yahwist, which is the earliest writers. And then along come the priestly group. And the priestly group said, Noah couldn't have just had two animals because the priests had to sacrifice those animals. So he had to have more than two, or else they
Yeah.
wouldn't have been able to reproduce when they came back. So the so the people who study the language can say, oh, well, this was written during this period of time, the same way we would know, like Shakespeare wrote that English, and today is another English, and they put the two Englishes together, but in this case, it's the two Hebrews languages, because they're different depending on what year they're done. And that's why we have two Noah stories, but nobody knows we have two Noah stories. Or very few people know we have two Adam and Eve stories. There was
I
one
didn't know that.
story, and then, yeah, there's a story where, God took Adam's
Rib.
rib, but then there's a story where he picked up the dirt and blew on it and created the two of them together. It's right there, but
Yeah.
it's not the one that we know.
Yeah,
So
because
it's really fascinating.
it is, and I remember because the Noah stories are fascinating for several reasons. One is because I don't think people realise that there's a couple of things that people don't necessarily realise. That one is, if you look at the population of human beings, it's fluctuated throughout history, in the history that we know. But it wasn't until about the 1800s, 1850, that there was 1 billion people on the earth. So at one point there was only 1 million, and it took centuries to get to 1 billion. And at the same time, when you look at the Mediterranean Sea, that was once dry land, and between Morocco and Spain, well, sort of Gibraltar and Morocco, it was a landmass. They were joined, and eventually the Atlantic went over the top and collapsed that wall, and the sea literally dropped into the Mediterranean. So in that concept, Noah is a true story, because we know it happened in history. And so everybody that lived in what is now the bed of, the seabed of the Mediterranean would have. What they don't know is if it literally collapsed overnight and that the Atlantic just poured in, or whether it kind of started as a river and it just got more and more powerful until eventually the Mediterranean filled up. And I think there's is it the Caspian or the Arabian Sea? There's many of these around the world. A lot of these kind of inland seas, or smaller seas, where the ocean has collapsed into them, were actually once kind of big bowls on the land, and eventually the land got eroded by the sea, the ocean, and the ocean filled it up. So there's lots, so the Noah stories should actually be seen as factual.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, because it is not unique to there. Isn't there a flood story in almost every
I think
old
there is,
tradition?
Yeah.
There's a flood story in Gilgamesh, I believe, and I don't know. It's been a long time since I studied that.
That's the thing, is, which comes back
stories.
to that thing, doesn't it? When like I was saying, we were saying at the beginning, when you get into the concept of religions, they're all the same, and it's similar. Like I was saying, it's like a big family reunion, where we're all at this big family reunion, and then everyone goes away with the same story, but they remember it from a slightly different perspective, and
Yes.
and so you end up with this kind of Chinese whispers, where it's all slightly different to its original source, but it's all very similar because everyone remembers the key parts of the story.
Like there's life after death. There is some divine entity, or just things that are just commonalities in all religions. So that's what I study as an interfaith minister. What's common in all?
Yeah, do you know, I'd forgotten how we got to that bit of conversation until you just mentioned that.
Well, because you're just such a good conversationalist, we can go anywhere.
Yeah, well, we have, haven't we? We have. Um, although I am conscious of time because we've already been talking for nearly an hour, um, and so yeah, we were talking about the free books. How long did it take you to write them?
Um, Maybe not that long to write, but let me just tell you this story
Mm-hmm.
about my last book. Well, my next book pretty much talks about what we were just talking about.
Okay.
My future book. It's in its it's I have the black and white drawings from the illustrator, and I'm working with the drawings and the language to make sure that every page says what it has to say. So
Yeah.
that's the process. But my previous book was on The King and the Monster is on addiction. And this is a personal story because my son had an addiction problem and about a couple of years ago, and he had to go into treatment. And my daughter-in-law had a 6-year-old. My granddaughter was 6 at the time, and she called me up and she said, Kathy, can you please write a book to help me explain what's going on with Dominic to my daughter? And I said, sure, I can do that. Then I hung up the phone and I'm like, how the hell am I going to do
Yeah.
that? Addiction, it's explaining a complex thing, disease and everything to a child. But I said, I just put it out of my mind for a while. And about a week or 10 days later, I was traveling and I was on an airplane from heading out to LA to visit my other daughter. And I had my earbuds in and I had been at on a delayed flight 6 hours at the airport. So by the time I finally got on the plane, it was really late. And I'm like, yay, I can put my noise canceling earbuds in and sit here and meditate and just chill. I have a long flight ahead of me. But when I did that, I closed my eyes, started breathing, started meditating, and immediately I saw this words, King and the Monster. And then this whole story just evolved in my head. Page after page, vision after vision came to the very end. And I immediately pulled out my laptop. Good thing I had it with me. And I said, I better write this down because it's a pretty good story.
Yeah.
So I wrote the whole thing down. And that was the genesis of The King and the Monster. I changed it slightly as I talked to people in recovery or therapists that would just say, tweak this and tweak that. Um, Even my son had input because I had the healing helpers in my vision. I saw them running down the side of a hill with white coats flapping. And he said, oh, Mom, they're like really, really strong people. They're like superheroes. So now I changed the imagery for the healing helpers into superheroes flying down to help him with a big H on their chest. So there were slight changes in the story, but the stories um, has the same impact because it's a couple of really important things about addiction. One, it's a trap. So the king just goes to this quicksand pit, hoping that he has like this shadow in his heart, which is the representation of trauma or a broken heart or a sad heart. And he thinks, oh, if I go to this quicksand pit, maybe I can make myself feel better. So he goes to the quicksand pit, but it was a trap, and the monster jumps up and grabs him. And then he starts acting like a monster. And when he starts acting like a monster, he's becomes separate and separate from his family until he finally calls out for help. And when he calls out for help, um, the he has a team of guardian angels that are illustrated in the book as bright lights. And that is because I did holotropic breathing one time. I don't know if you've ever heard
I've
of
heard of
that,
it.
but
Yeah.
it's developed by Stanislav Grof. And I was doing this holotropic breathing, and you get into an altered state of consciousness. And while I was in that altered state, I looked up and I saw these bright lights, maybe 15 of them over my head. And I knew, like you knew when you were in that state, I knew that they were loving, and I started crying from the feeling, the love. And I nicknamed them Team Kathi because I knew they were my team.
Yeah.
And so in the book, the king has a team of guardian angels, and they help him find, direct him to find the healing helpers that bring him to the healing house, and then they, help him heal his heart and give him strength and remind him. They don't they don't make him better. They remind him that he is. He remind him of his beautiful heart, remind him of his wisdom and strength, remind him of all the good things that he already is that he forgot. And then he goes home, and that's the happy ending of the story. So the story also, in the very beginning, when I talk about the shadow in his heart, I mention, because children interpret things differently.
Yeah.
They internalize something. So they see their father being sick and having an addiction, and they're like, this is my fault. Or like they might with any trauma that happens in the family. They say, well, I should have done something differently. So in this book, I make it very, very clear that the shadow was in his heart before the children were born. And it shrunk when they were born, but it still remained. And so he has to go to the healing house to heal his heart so he can come back and love them fully. And they are not responsible for it. They're actually helping him.
So yeah, because I think that's difficult for children, isn't it? But I think that's difficult for everybody, that when somebody suffers with an addiction, the issue is already there. But at some point, it's been at some point it started to be fed, and kind of it's just always, I'm trying to think how I'm trying to articulate this. There's one of the things I've always been fortunate with in my life is I'm easily distracted. So I had a friend who effectively was lost to alcoholism, but he had his addictions throughout his life. And I used to live with him and stuff like that. And so I had my fair share of recreational fun, shall we say. And but I was always fortunate because I don't have an addictive personality. I get bored incredibly quickly. I haven't owned a game console since the 90s because once I'd played a few games, it's like, no, they're all the same. I'm bored now. So I just could never attach to anything. With my friend Nick, him and I used to have some real conversations about the demons, because I've had my own demons as well, and it is just the different way they've been handled. But the one for him that I always remember when him and I were talking is his demons used to come to him when he was sober, and he couldn't, and drinking turned them off. And yeah, so and
so
but effectively it was a lack of being able to cope with what was going on in his mind when he was sober.
Yes, that would be, the demons would be he was going to alcohol for comfort.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't find comfort on his own.
No.
So he was going there for comfort. And that's what the king does. He goes to the quicksand pit for comfort. He's hoping that he has a shadow and a sadness in his heart. And the more, as time goes on and I do more of these talks about my books, I've studied even more and learned more as much as I can. And the trauma, I'm just recognizing is like generational sometimes. There can be a trauma that is passed down. There's studies where trauma is passed down through the DNA.
Yes.
So like a grandchild could feel the trauma in her cells of the grandmother having this trauma. So that trauma is, according to Gabor Mate, who's like the a renowned doctor of addiction specialist, and his contention is that all addictions are caused by trauma. And trauma is something that is in our bodies, and you have to heal the trauma in order to heal the addiction.
I agree.
And that can be generational trauma. He mentions how so many of his patients in Canada are Native Americans whose grandparents were taken from their homes and forced into schools. And why does he have such a huge percentage of Native Americans in his practice? Because he says they had alcohol, they had tobacco before the trauma, and they didn't have the addictions. They had the addictions after the trauma. Because it's like, it's like what you're saying. There's a desire for comfort and a desire for peace. And
Yeah.
and that's what is the reason why people use the drugs.
Yeah,
because they don't feel safe in the regular daily.
but people think it's the opposite. They think that the demon is in the alcohol, the demon is in being drunk. No, the demon is in when they're peace, when they're sober. They're faced with the darkness, they're faced with the demons. But when they drink, and when people talk about, they're trying to escape, it's, you're not wrong, but you don't understand the peace that they sit in when they escape. Because because people, but they've got a family that loves them. Yeah, but it's internal. Inside, I don't feel that love that you feel for me. I don't see it. I'm not able to project it. When I look in, I've talked about this before on the podcast. When I was in my mid to late 20s, I was contemplated killing myself to the point that I was sitting on a bench at a train platform in Allscott in London, contemplating which train to get in front of. And there's no mad epiphany. I just realised this isn't for me. I'm not going to do it. And but that didn't cure my problems. It started them, because the person I'd invested so much time self-loathing the person that I saw in the mirror, I didn't know how to like that person. And it took years and years to figure out how, you have to learn how to love that person. And there's no way is the cycle complete. There is still, and if I've learned anything, it's understanding it's not possible to be in love with yourself every single day. And if the only way you're ever going to get there is to practice it. And you have to sometimes do things that you don't necessarily want to do, like exercise, diet, and, and that's not for everybody, but it's understanding the things that make you hate yourself and then being disciplined enough to stop yourself from doing them. But then that's hard, because you sometimes aren't enjoying things, but you don't realise that it's a vicious cycle, that if you go down that road, you start self-loathing and you fall out of love with who you are. And it's different for everybody, but it's trying to explain to people that sometimes that can still feel like a cliff edge. Because I'm aware sometimes, like, you fall in and out of, you're falling out of love with yourself again. And when you do that, you go to a dark place.
And that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book also, is because it's easy for the family to look at someone with an addiction and say, what a jerk.
Yeah.
So a person should be ashamed of themselves. And all of that, because they're doing such crazy things. And that is just the opposite of the energy that person needs, because they already feel ashamed.
Yeah.
They already feel like they don't love themselves. And what they need from their friends and their family is love and the ability to see through or past the addiction to the person himself or herself and who they are. So when my son was going through the worst of his problems, I would I would look at him and remind myself who he was as a little 5-year-old boy.
Yeah.
How sweet he was, how loving. And this was the true true Dominic, the loving person, the loving, tender-hearted person. And I called it holding him in holy space. So I would see him as a beautiful person. I would see him as a, a, a glowing light, a glowing soul that was loving and passionate and tender, sweet-hearted. And that's how I would see him, even though he was acting differently. And in my book, I make a major claim. I make it very clear that the addiction, and it comes up out of the quicksand pit and looks like dark smoke. Addiction is separate from the king. The addiction is separate from the king. So you can't say, so we don't want to say that person is the addiction. When person has cancer, you don't say that person is cancer.
No.
You know, they have it and they can get rid of it.
Well, because this
It's an
is
illness.
something I've tried to explain to sort of friends and family in the past when they first learned about it. But we loved you. Yeah, but that's about you. That's not about me. You feeling love for me is irrelevant. It's external to my presence. You know, that's nice. That's how you sleep at night. That's what makes you feel good. But people say, yeah, but you know you're loved. I've never denied that I didn't know I was loved. That again, you're talking about an external. I'm on about how I felt about myself. It's not whether I discerned, you know, I could sit down and rationalize I'm a nice guy. I'm a decent guy. I wouldn't wish harm on people. I'm not evil. I could rationalize all of that all day long. Didn't mean I loved myself. Didn't mean I appreciated myself. Didn't mean I had any values to my gifts, my abilities, or valued myself as a friend or as a brother or as a son. Is all irrelevant. Everything that people would talk to me about, and even today they'll still say, like, no, you're telling me about your feelings about me. I didn't have those feelings about myself. And if you don't hold those feelings about yourself, it's irrelevant how other people see you, because it's external. And
Right.
what I was trying to explain to people is that hatred, that lack of any love for myself that I had, is how I went to bed every night. It's how I woke up every day. How I walked around. It's just like, you are the most worthless piece of shit that has ever existed. What is the point? Why are you wasting oxygen in the world? And that ends up being a dialogue in your own head. And it becomes a feeling inside. And all of this people projecting, yeah, but we loved you, we support. We think, yeah, but you're talking about you. And I'm trying to explain me. Just because you don't.
So how did you get out of it?
Like I said, there was a part of me that was able to, like I said, the epiphany thing is that I realized this isn't me. I'm not going to do it. So at that point, I had to figure out what was I going to do. And it didn't go well. I ended up in trouble with the law. I ended up getting arrested. I nearly went to prison. I ended up bankrupt. So I was very self-destructive because I didn't have an answer. And it took many years. It took many years. I ended up as a qualified counsellor. I ended up as a qualified hypnotherapist. You know, you just immerse yourself in trying to understand psychology and human behaviour. And on a good day, you can sort of sit there and say to yourself, you know, if you're going to beat yourself up, do so with a feather. Be kind about it. Other days, you'll sit there and say, pull your pants up and stop being a bloody knob. You're being a bloody idiot and you're no good to anyone. All right? So stop being a dickhead. And then you also have to sort of, on one hand, accountability is a big one. You sometimes just have to look at your life and say, did that person really do that to you, or did you do that to you? Did you allow that into your life, and did you allow that to happen? And you have to stop justifying your excuses and sort of say. And the other one is, and this is where I still coach people and stuff, but you have to get out of a victim mentality. Because even if everything, do you know what? Even if it was unfair, even if life isn't kind to you, the only person that cares about that is you. Because ultimately, studying history sometimes was useful for me because I then discovered and realized how difficult it was for my grandparents. And,
Ah.
they survived. They were part of the Second World War. They survived that war. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at things like history, you start realizing that 3 out of every 5 children died before they were adults. 1 in 20 women
Yeah.
died in childbirth. If you weren't wealthy, then you had no medicine. So if you fell ill, you know, it's you're going to die. Not because there wasn't medication to treat you, but because you didn't have any money for medication. And simple things that we take for granted today killed people. So you sometimes have to remind yourself, regardless of the politics in the world, you live at the greatest time in history that's ever existed.
Mm-hmm. True.
And you have to study history and put yourself in that position. And I've had some lucky experiences. I was surfing in 2016. I was in Morocco surfing, and when we were surfing, you're driving around Morocco. I was in a place called Zeraut. I think it was. Apologies if I've mispronounced that. And we were a couple of hours away, and you used to do this long drive along the coast and through the desert areas and mountains and stuff. And along these routes, you see these men who are holding up fish on the side of the road, and you think, oh, okay. You don't think about it, and then you realise at some point that's what they do for a living. They catch fish, and they sell them. And if they don't catch any fish,
I don't know.
yeah, right. And then you realise these little plastic tent things that you see made out of carrier bags and stuff is where they live. And you sort of oh, right, oh, okay. So that you start sort of absorbing that, but then you kind of think, well, I don't live here, I don't know. I'll be getting on a plane soon and going home. And we were in this car park by the beach, and I'm literally washing my feet off with this bottle of water, just washing it off because I've got sand on my feet and I'm just trying to wash the sand off. So if I finish doing that and I go round to the back of the van to go and get another bottle of water, and this guy comes over, this local man comes over, probably in his 60s or whatever, and he's talking to me and I've no idea what he's saying. And the guide, our guide, he says he's asking if he can have some water. And I'm like, yeah, of course you can. Yeah, have a bottle of water. Take this one. It's not being opened, and this is like a 2-litre bottle of water. We got 10 litres of water in the car, in this van. And he starts blessing me. He starts doing this guy. He's always blessing you. Oh, no, what the fuck's he blessing me for? He said, because you've given him some water, and that's the only fresh water he's got today, and it's probably the only fresh water he's going to have tomorrow. And literally 1 minute earlier, I'm washing my feet off because I'm inconvenienced by sand. And this guy is so grateful because I've given him a bottle of water. And he doesn't want another bottle either. Even though, well, in that case, you can have them all. It's just water. He's just like, no, yeah. He's no. He's grateful for the 2 litres of fresh water he's been given. That's enough. I don't need any more. But it just kind of it made me for a while realise wow, you spoilt bastard. You've no idea how difficult people have a life, and you moan, and I moaned because the coffee shop closed before I got there for a cup of coffee.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of what a very, very important practice is the practice of appreciation.
Yeah.
Just appreciating whatever it is you have. I remember one time in my life when I was in a very, very bad dark spot. And I think I had walking pneumonia. I had a fever and I was really sick and I hadn't gone to the store and I didn't have any food, literally didn't have food in my house, but I had 15 cents and I walked 2 blocks to a diner and I got a cup of soup. And that cup of soup was the best cup of soup I ever had. And I didn't even notice that everybody else is eating meals because I appreciated that cup of soup. And that level of appreciation is something that builds on itself.
Yeah.
Because the more you appreciate something around you, anything, it could be anything, the more you appreciate it, the more comes to you to appreciate.
Well, it's like, as I'm telling you that story, there's a part of me that has to recognize that there was a guy that was bankrupt who nearly went to prison, and 15 years later was having a surf holiday in Morocco, and that guy could be ungrateful. The guy that had nothing and lost everything would just have cried if I was able to sit down in a room and tell him, "Oh, this is what your life's going to be like in 20 years." On Friday, for the third time in 3 successive years, in 3 successive years, I'm flying to Munich to go to the Christmas markets with my friends that live in Munich. Right. So my life is so good. I can just jump on a plane for a long weekend to go to Munich for the Christmas market with my friends who have already planned some events, are already doing the Christmas baking. Do you know what we're going to have?
It's a big deal. I've been there. It's
right.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I've done this. This will be the third year in a row that I've done it with them because they live there. They moved to Munich. So I will also be the same guy that thinks his life isn't fair. And it's just like, hang on, how would I explain that to the guy that was bankrupt the day after he filed for bankruptcy? He's got no money, he's got no accounts, he's relying on his family to take care of him. And how would I explain to him that this guy who's talking to you today has a podcast for a start, has a job, is sort of relatively successful in what he's doing, and by the way is just for shits and giggles jumping on a plane to go and see friends in Munich because he can afford to, and he's going to have a great time, and he's going to love every minute of it. But he actually might wake up in a bad mood thinking his life is unfair.
I don't know. I think that particular guy at the end of the day appreciates everything.
I appreciate it when I'm vocalizing it. If I'm talking to someone, I sit down and I think, yeah, Jesus Christ. And that's the trick. If going back to that's the trick. The guy that was self-loathing was always focused on what he didn't have.
Right.
And
the guy who's happy today is always focused on what he does have. Yeah. If not always, at least generally. Yeah. Generally, we can't always be living up in the the heaven.
And the other thing that he realized, the other thing that I realized is, if you want something, you have to understand it's your responsibility to go after it, and that doesn't guarantee that it will work out for you. But a lot of that pain you suffer is because you stare at the window, watching the world go by, wishing you were doing something, and you've never just stood up and opened the door to see, well, I wonder if I can achieve something. And it could be, you hate your job. Right, well then, unfortunately, your current position is you hate your job, but you have to work full time. Well, then you need to go to night school and qualify to do something else. And if that takes you 3 years, that's life. That's the literal biblical definition of you reap what you sow.
And I would like to add to that, because that is something that I've done, because those 3 years are going to pass.
Yes.
Anyway.
Exactly.
You're either going to have that extra degree and get another job or not. And when you're talking, I know back earlier you talked a little bit, touched on the subject of victimhood.
Yeah.
And that is very, very important, because to understand that as a quote unquote victim, you have some responsibility for where you are.
100%.
You have if you're in a job you hate, you have some responsibility for being there. And when you accept that you have responsibility, even for these terrible things or things that you think are just unfair and you're the victim of, but if you accept responsibility, what does that do? That gives you power to change it. Yeah. If you don't accept any responsibility, you're helpless. You can't change anything. But the minute you start accepting responsibility for whatever the situation is, and I speak having learned that as a 24-year-old, because I was married for a very brief period of time to a total lunatic who was physically violent. And I left that marriage and I'm like, what happened and why did that happen to me? And I realized that, oh, these are the things that I did that I shouldn't have done. This is how I looked at life that maybe I need to change. And I accepted responsibility for having been in that position,
Yeah.
even though I was the one who was beaten. But I still accepted responsibility for that. And once I did, now, that was
Because
life changed like black and white.
this is it, because there's an element of no one is saying you deserved it. No one is saying it's fair. What we're saying is it's your reality. And only you have the power to change your reality.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
And it did take me a long, long time. And even when I was doing really good things to change, I was always focusing on, well, I haven't got this, I haven't achieved that, I haven't done this. And it's a significant, there were lots of things that happened that were significant. But a recent one that's much more tangible for people is there was a point at the beginning of this year in January when I realised I'd done 100 episodes of the David Watson podcast. And I suddenly had this, it had passed me by. I was like, oh, I've done 100 episodes. And suddenly it dawned on me. It had taken me 4 years to do 100 episodes. And there was a couple of times when I nearly quit. And now I'm at like 169, 170 episodes. And it's just got bigger and bigger, and it's building all the time. But I started out without a single clue how to do it. And then I realised on my own how I'd achieved 100 episodes and the conversations I'd had, the things I'd learned, everything. And it was an extremely slow process that built, and it became its own perpetual motion. And what I know how to do today, I had no idea how to start out. And that, I would say, is probably the key learning point for everybody. Nobody has it figured out at the beginning. And I don't have it figured out now. I just know that when I turn up, it takes care of itself. But there was a realization when I'd passed 100. There was this personal realization of, do you know what? Well done. That's a bloody good effort.
Well done.
Yeah.
Very good. Well done.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And, and now it will probably be nearly 200 episodes by February or March next year. And I'll probably end up doing probably close to 100 episodes every year. But it actually took me 4 years to get to 100. But for as long as I want to do this, I will probably be able to do 100 episodes a year.
Yeah.
But it's...
Well...
yeah, but it's... The length of time it took is... Oh, right, yeah, but those 4 years would have passed anyway. And I'd never... Yes. And I'd been trying to do a podcast for several years beforehand, but because I didn't know how to do it, I was always looking for somebody to do it with. And that was never working out. So it just never happened. And then in the end, I just have to do it myself.
Well, that's what I'm doing with my books, quite honestly.
Yeah, you just have to.
My first book, I had to take computer classes and learn how to use a computer. My book on adoption was one of the very first ones on Amazon. When Midwest Book Review said, "Oh, we're putting your book on Amazon," I said, "What's Amazon?" That's where I was. I had to buy a computer to work because I thought, oh, there's a computer, I can write like this. That was back a long, long time ago. So it's just like taking one thing after another. And now, I know, how to work with the Illustrator. Now I know how to,
because it's
much more.
Interesting. When I first started, I did something similar to you. I went to writing classes, but my book was originally a screenplay. I'd written it as a screenplay and then adapted it, took the original story and adapted it to a book. But it took years for that to happen, to sit down and write. And then one of the things that like people don't understand, like, how do you write a book? Well, you actually just sit down and start writing it. And, I was lucky because I always knew what the end was, So to give you some reference, my book is about suicide and is about somebody commits suicide and how their soul reincarnates. But
Ah,
because they jump off a building, so effectively every chapter is a floor that he passes before he hits the floor,
oh,
right? So of course the
ooh,
ending takes care of itself because he's going to hit the floor and die. But it's how the soul separates and reincarnates and what it learns in that process. And
wow,
yeah,
that sounds wonderful.
and so that's kind of how it happened. But I then, in the process of trying to write that, I had to figure out. Well, I know how it ends, so rather than like try and get all wrapped up in how to, the thing that I figured out that worked for me is I'm very good at writing short stories. So rather than write a book, just try and write 22 short stories that one follows the other, and don't worry about it. Just write the first one, and then the next one will follow, and you know eventually you're going to hit the floor, so you have to stop then. And then what people don't understand is that's what becomes known as your first draft, because you then
Yes.
print that off maybe, and then at some point you've got to. For me, I always needed at least like 6-7 weeks before I could read it. I'd print it off and then I'd read it, and it'd be like being back at school. I'd be there with a red biro, with a red pen,
Hmm.
marking off stuff that doesn't make sense, and then with a pencil, write in notes about what I wanted it to say, because it's only when for me, I had to forget enough about it to go back and read it to try and understand what I was trying to explain.
Mm.
And you end up, by the time you kind of come to a printed book, for me, it was 3 or 4 drafts before it became final.
Well, my books are like that too, even though they're like 1,500 words,
Yeah,
but every word, every sentence has meaning, and every sentence has a significant
mm,
part, is a significant part of the story. And then they also interact with, I don't have to say everything because there's the illustrations out
yeah.
there.
But it was funny
My
because
next,
one of the things um that I had to learn when I was writing the book is you learn about things called a first draft, and every
yeah.
writer talks about the fact that no, you just write the first draft. Doesn't matter how
Yeah.
it sounds, doesn't matter how it looks. You've just got to get it down. And I never knew, and it makes sense once you've done it, that when people write a book and it's finished and you're reading that finished book, that for some that's 6-7 drafts down the road, and
Yeah.
for other it's 2 or 3 drafts. But nobody writes a book from start to finish and prints it. It's never been done. They write a book and then rewrite it, then rewrite it, then rewrite it. And what you have is literally, no pun intended, but the finished article.
Yes.
You know, so,
Yes.
and that's probably a really good.
Well,
Sorry, go on.
I'm I'm working on the drafts of my next book as they're coming along. I'm working on what is even the best title for it, because it's a story of the survival of the soul. It's a story about death now, but it's not death. It's like two sparks of light come into the world together, and as they're passing, flying through the universe, they start chatting with each other, and they say, "Oh, we could have fun together. Let's go to the same family." And then they pass through the tunnel of light, and they land as one is a puppy and one is a little girl,
You could
and they
call it.
speak.
You could call it. It seemed like a good idea.
It seemed like a good idea. Well, there are two sparks that are that grow up together,
Yeah,
and then and then dog, and they talk in heart language, in spark language. I call it in the book spark language, and I explain that that's the language of the heart. So how you can communicate with someone without actually saying a word. So
yeah.
that's how they speak to each other. And then at some point the dog leaves, has told tells her that, I've done all I can do here, and I want to go out for more adventures. I want to go back
Mm.
and start doing another life with new adventures. And so the girl cries and cries and cries until she finally says, "Well, I have to stop crying. What can I do?" And the dog is now a ghost dog up in the air and points to her little brother's room. And she says, "Oh, I know. I can go cuddle with my brother in bed." And she does. And then she feels better. So the Sparky dog is guiding her in her healing over his loss until she starts seeing balls lying around. And every time she's they're there in the story, they're there, but she never sees them until after she's healed. Her heart is healed from the loss. And then she finally starts seeing them, and she says she found one in the front seat of the car and with her mom, and she said, "Mom, do you think Sparky's leaving these balls around for me to tell me he's happy where he is?" And the mom says, "Well, I think you know the answer to that." And then that night she has a dream and they play, and Sparky wants to play ball. So she throws the ball and Sparky like bursts, jumps in the air and sprouts wings. So now Sparky can fly. He has wings. So he's like, look, I can fly now. And so they play ball all night. And she wakes up the next morning with the ball in her hand. And she says, "Oh, Sparky, we will always be friends." And then the last page is a picture of her with her family and Sparky, and then the future with new dog coming and new people coming, all these sparks of light and personalities approaching. So her life is the history of her life is all the people she's ever loved, whether they're alive or not, and then moving into the future with more love and more people, more dogs.
And
So
when's that due out?
I'm hoping to have I'm ready for, I would say by February, if not before, because I'm, really close to the final, draft right now. It's like the question is, how do I get that last page to illustrate exactly what I want? Because what I want to illustrate is when people die, they just disappear. They never die. And their love is always still there. So that's the image that I want, that Sparky and his love is still connected to her, whether he's dead or alive. And that's true in my humble opinion of anybody who's passed. But then there's new people coming, and there's new dogs coming, new friends, a husband maybe, and her own children. So there's all this more sparks of love, more people coming into her life. So the illustration on the last page is where I'm like, how do we get that image to display what I want to display, and with whatever. So that's
an image that just popped in my head is to have her stood in front of a mirror. So this side of the mirror shows her life, and this side of the mirror shows everything she can't see.
I'll think about that.
But I keep seeing this girl in front of a mirror.
Yeah. The girl in front of the mirror. What does...
But I'm seeing it as if I'm looking at a room. And so I'm seeing her side on. So whatever that means.
There's something in the past and something in the future.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to think about that and, see how we can...
So
we just might have a mirror in this story at the end of the day. But that's where I am.
Maybe it's just an idea that takes you on to the next idea. Maybe it's just a bridge between two ideas.
Yes, I think there's going to be more Sparky. And I was concerned, first of all, about putting the ball into the story, because what happens if a kid loses their dog and they don't find balls? But two things happened that made me, as I was thinking about the story and writing it and composing it, I talked to my girlfriend whose brother had been killed, and ever since he died, she found bluebird feathers all over and considered that as a sign from him. But then one day she was getting in a car to see her uncle with her sister, and there was a feather in the car. And she's like, this is too much. And then I talked to a good friend of mine who is a therapist. And I'm like, how do I, read my book and tell me what you think about it? Because I'd like to get it, approved, therapist approved. And I said, what do you think about the ball part? And she said, should I keep it in? And she said, well, definitely. She said, when my mother died, I was 16, and a good friend of hers came up to me and gave me an image of a butterfly, and she gave my sister an image of a bird and said, when you see these, think of your mother. And then she said, years later, she's sitting outside on Mother's Day, and a butterfly landed on her food. And that just was so meaningful for her. And so she said, yes, keep that in there, because I don't know if you've lost people, but when my husband died, there was all kinds of signs that, lights flashing on and off, all kinds of things happening. And even my daughter, I brought her in to get her first phone, and it was 2 years after he died, and I was still devastated. It was a very tragic death. And I was like really upset and sad that I was alone bringing her in to get her first phone, because my husband was such a joyful person. He would have been dancing like, oh, we're getting her first phone. We're so excited. And I was like, oh, he's not here and I'm doing it without him, and very sad. But she gets her phone number, and her phone number coming out of the computer was the year of his birth, which was a little strange, but we took it as a signal that maybe I wasn't alone there that day getting her phone. So there are messages that people give us, and that's what my next book is about.
And that's a wonderful place to stop. I look forward to talking to you again about that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think you'll enjoy it.
Thank you.
The book. As much as I've enjoyed our conversation today, it's been great. Thank you so much.
So that was Kathi and I. We are going to talk again later next year. But reflect on that. And Kathi and I talked a little bit afterwards when I stopped recording, just what I need to be grateful for. And one of the things that her and I discussed was, if you're not careful, that compass can start pointing towards what you don't have, instead of pointing at what you do have right now and what can still come. If your life isn't over, there's many more adventures to be had. But you have to, like I said, when I focus on what I've achieved and what I have, I genuinely realise I am a lucky person, a really lucky person, and I have a great life. But it's very simple to just point in the wrong direction, and it does lead you astray, and it makes you feel lost. And so with that, as always, thank you to everybody that listens. I do appreciate it. Thank you for everybody that shares, comments, and just for everybody that has stuck by me while I've done these podcasts. It is appreciated. And wherever you're from, whatever you believe, please take care and be blessed. Thank you.